Okay, so chapter 3 is a graphing review. And for this one, we're graphing a line. In slope-intercept form. And we're going to do the first one with a fractional slope. Okay, so the very first thing is when we talk about slope-intercept form, and hopefully everybody's seen this at some point in time and it's rattling around in your head there somewhere. That's y equals mx plus b. And for this part of it, m is your slope. And remember, when you do slope, it always wants to be in a fraction form. That basically, slope is your rise over your run. It's how much you move up and down versus how much you move side to side. And your b value is the y-intercept. And that's the value where it crosses the y-axis. Okay, so everything that we're doing in chapter 3 and the graphing we do have to do in chapter 4, it's all basically spinning off that one equation that you're going to do, and we're just going to work through it and work through it and work through it. When maybe a little bit later on, we may get one other version of it, but for the first little bit, this is what we're looking at. And if you've ever wondered why slope is m, and this is just me in my head kind of figuring it out, that when you think about slope, the m that's here for slope, that tells you how to move from one point to the next. Because most people say, well, I want the slope to be s. Well, we didn't come up with slope. That was somebody else that came up with slope. So their m was different than what we would do. So whenever you think about the slope, just think about that's how you're going to move. That's the movement. It's from one point to the next point. It's up 2 and over 3. It's down 4 and over 7, or whatever the number is going to be when you go through that. And the b value, that's your y-intercept. Well, that tells you where to begin. So the m tells you how to, the m for slope tells you how to move to the next point. The b for the y-intercept tells you where to begin. And because it's the y-intercept, it has to begin on the y-axis. So as you're going through and thinking about that, that to me was how I kind of made those things make sense, so that the m and the b actually stood for something that made sense for what was going on. Okay, so very first thing they're going to do is they're going to give you an equation and they're going to ask you to graph it. And you'll have something like this, where you got y is equal to negative 3/4 x plus 1. Okay, and for these, the best thing to do is, some of these cases, they'll actually ask you on some of the questions, what is the slope and what's the y-intercept? And again, some questions they'll ask you for this, some they won't, but we'll go ahead and go ahead and get these out of the way. For the slope, that's the number in front of x, so that's negative 3/4. The y-intercept, that's a positive 1. Okay, and the negative 3/4 basically is this. Or the positive of the slope tells you which way the line is going to go. So for this one, that means you're going down 3, and it's over 4, so you're going over 4. Now, again, because we're right-hand dominant, the over 4 is always going to be 4 to the right. And you're going to start where we're going to begin. If we stick with the B part up there, you're going to begin at positive 1. Okay, so for this line, when they ask you to graph it, and they should go ahead and give you all the lines here so you don't have to worry about it. So we're going to begin at positive 1 and make sure you start on the y-axis, which is always the one that's up and down. So put your first dot at 1, and from that point, you're going to go down 3 and over 4 to the right side. So you're going straight down, 1, 2, 3, and over 1, 2, 3, 4, and put your next dot right there. Take your line, connect the dots, and dots got a little bit off, so let's see if we can do that one just a little bit. There we go, that's a little better. There you go. And again, the right side should always match up with the slope. If this is negative, the right side has to point down. If that was positive, the right side's got to point up. All right, let's give you another one here real quick. Let's go with y equals 1/2 x minus 5. Now, one thing they may ask you to do on some of these, if they ask you to name the y-intercept, occasionally they may give it to you where instead of just giving you a number, they may ask you to do it as an ordered pair. If they give it to you as an ordered pair, just put 0 in for the x value. Because if you graph every point on the x-axis, or on the y-axis, every x value is 0. So it's always 0 on whatever the number is. Okay, so for this one, there's our xy axis. Okay, so your y value is -5, so start at -5. And from there it's positive, so if it's positive, you're going up 1 and over 2 to the right. So go up 1 over 2, put the next dot, and then just use your line to connect those two things together. Okay. Now, when you do draw this line, make sure it's a solid line. Probably should have done the same thing back here. That should have been a solid line as you're going through here. Okay, so they give it to you in a fraction form. Everything's there you need for the slope. You've got the numbers, and go for it. The only thing they do on the next problems is they ask you to do the same thing, graph the same lines, but for this one, instead of it being in a fractional slope, they ask you to graph the lines, and this time they're going to give it to you in an integer slope. Okay, so 3x minus 4. Only difference is, again, instead of your slope being a fraction, it's a whole number. And all you've got to remember is that anytime you've got your whole number slope, to make it a fraction, just put it over 1. Okay, and then your y-intercept's -4. against up 3 and then 1 to the right. And you're going to start at -4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So you're going to start at -4, up 1, 2, 3, 1 to the right. That would put you right there. Okay. And that's pretty much about it. There's not really a whole lot else that they can do on these. Is, here's the numbers and just go back and do that. Only thing you have to do is occasionally with some of the problems, they may give it so instead of every value being 1, it might be that it's 2, especially if some of the numbers are bigger. But for the most part, that's it. That's all you're doing is just taking those different numbers that you have there and just, if you can tell me what the slope is and tell me what the y-intercept is, then you're good to go. Now, one other thing that they'll ask you to do that's kind of a shortcut, but it depends on the problem that you're looking at and exactly what the setup is that with some of these, they're going to ask you to graph it using the x and y intercepts. Now, you've already got one where you've got the y-intercept, so we're good for that one. When they ask you for x and y intercepts, there's a little bit of a shortcut you can do. Okay, so this one, they tell you up front, you're going to graph it using the x and y intercepts. The good thing is they tell you, here's the x-intercept, here's the y-intercept. And this one's about as straightforward as it can be. If your x-intercept is -5, you go to -5 on the x-axis and you put a dot at -5. If your y-intercept is 7, you go to the y-axis, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, put a dot at 7, and connect your two dots, and that's your answer. And if you're thinking there's got to be more to it than that, no, that's it. They give you an x-intercept, they give you a y-intercept, put those two dots, one on the x-axis, one on the y-axis, and then just connect the dots, and that's it. Okay, and then the last thing on the graphing review. Is they ask you to find or graph the equation by finding the slope and the y-intercept. And this is the question where in the earlier part we went ahead and defined what the slope and the y-intercept was. This one's the same thing. This one they actually ask you what is the slope, tell me what the y-intercept. So two different answers to fill in. Then you go back and graph it. So it's basically a three-part question. And this one is not going to be in y equals mx plus b form. You've got something like this. 9x plus 3y is equal to 6. Okay, if they give you this one on the graph review, they ask you to find the slope and the y-intercept. If the equation is not in y equals mx plus b form, that's what you have to do. You have to rewrite it so it's in y equals mx plus b form. And to do that, you're pretty much going to have to do the same thing every single time. It's basically like a two-step problem here. Step one is you're going to add or subtract away the x value, depending on what that number is and what you have to do to it there. So whatever the x term is, in this case 9x, you've got to get rid of it and move to the other side. So for that part of it, we would wind up subtracting 9x and moving it over. And then once you've moved that x value over and you've got it by itself, there's only one thing left to do. Is you're going to divide all terms by the coefficient of y. Okay, so that's what we started with. So the first thing is we're going to add or subtract away the x value. So we're going to subtract 9x from both sides. And because we're doing y equals mx plus b form, you want to put that x value first. So 3y would equal negative 9x plus 6. So if we move the x value away, we got the x by itself. Step 2 now, we're going to go back and divide all the terms by the y coefficient, which was 3. We're going to take 3y equals negative 9x plus 6 and divide everything by 3. That way the 3's are canceled out, which is what we wanted. Y would equal negative 9/3, which would basically be negative 9 divided by 3 would just be negative 3. 6 divided by 3 is 2. Okay, so there's the equation that you wanted. And now they're going to go ahead and ask you two things. They're going to ask you what is the slope. So you got to tell me that the slope is negative 3. And then the y-intercept. And in this case, they're going to let you do just the value. So for this one, the y-intercept would be at 2. Okay, so for this one, y-intercept is 2. You're going to start at positive 2. Slope is negative 3, but again, when you get ready to graph it, if it's a whole number, just put it over 1. So from there, go down 1, 2, 3, over 1, and you've got your next point there, and then just connect the dots. Okay. And as far as what they run through on the graphing review, that's it. They give you the first few problems where everything's y equals mx plus b form. Just graph it. They give you one where they tell you, here's the x and y intercepts. Just put those dots on the paper and connect the dots, and that's all you have to do. The last one here, you've got to rewrite it, which is the one where it's got the most math involved, and have you go through those numbers there.